Hello everyone and welcome. In this video, we will introduce the concept of variables in Xojo. We will discuss some of the more common data types and how to use them in your code. We will also discuss some best practices for naming your variables, as well as how to assign values to them. And finally, we will build a small applications to put all these concepts into use. So let's get to it. A variable is a name given to a location in your computer's memory that contains a value. Usually, a variable has three properties: the name, the type of data it contains, and a value. So for example, you may have a variable named, let's say, my age, and it can hold values of type, let's say, integer, and for a sample value, let's say 16. A variable's data type could be almost anything. And in this video, we will discuss some of the more common data types and how to use them in your code. So again, a variable is a way for you to refer to a location in the computer's memory that holds a value you may need to access, either to read or to change. And in order to refer to this memory location, you'll begin by choosing a meaningful name for your variable. I have a few recommendations to choose the best names. So the first recommendation is that you want to pick meaningful names, is that the name that you choose for your variable must give you an idea of what the values are about. So for example, here we've chose my age, and by just simply looking at the name, you can tell that the values that will be stored in that memory locations are simply age values. The second recommendation is that you want to be consistent with your capitalizations. So really, there's no single way is the right way, but it just comes down to your preference. So some developers prefer camel casing, some prefer names with underscores, and some, let's say, use lowercase with no punctuations. So in my videos, you'll see that I will be consistent throughout, and I'll be using camel casing. That is to capitalize the first letter of every word. So there's no, right way and wrong way, but the most important thing is that you pick a way and be consistent with it throughout. And the third recommendation is that, well, it's technically not a recommendation, but it is an option that you might want to consider, is that when naming your variables, you can also include the data type as well as part of that name. So you can simply call my age, let's say, int. So this tells you, let's say, what the variable is going to be holding in terms of values, but also tells you that the data type of these values is integer. So this is going to be considered the name, but it tells you a lot about this variable. It tells you what values will be stored. It tells you what type of values will be stored. So some programmers definitely prefer to name their variables this way. Now, this proves very helpful, especially if you're working on an application that is a team project. So if you have other collaborators, if you have other teammates who will take over, let's say, your code, or will contribute to the same, let's say, project, by just looking at your code, they should be able to determine or to trace your code easily. So it should be easy to understand or maintain. Okay, and definitely good names for your variables will prove very beneficial. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can create variables in Xojo. So to create or declare a variable in Xojo, this is the syntax that we're going to be using. So the syntax is that you have var command, and then you choose a name for your variable, and then as command data type. So as you notice here, these parts are optional. So it's basically based on what you want to accomplish. You choose a name and also you choose a data type. But these parts here have to be used. So you need to use the var and the as commands. Now, also keep in mind that Xojo is not case sensitive, so typing this in lowercase, uppercase won't make any difference. And that's something good about Xojo. Except that I'm using this, format just so for me to distinguish between what's optional, what has to be, commands. So I'm distinguishing code from, what's optional. So I can choose any name I like. I could choose any type I like. However, this var command and this as have to be there when declaring a variable. So for example, if we wanted to declare this variable, my age, if we wanted to reserve a memory space for storing, let's say, these age values that are of type integer, then we have to follow the syntax. So we're going to say var, variable name is my age, and then as the data type, which is integer. So this simple line accomplishes quite a lot. And as I explained earlier, it reserves space in the computer's memory for the information that we want to store. It also sets aside a specific memorable name by which we can refer to this location in memory. And finally, it tells Xojo what type of data we will be storing in this location in memory. So telling Xojo which data type we will be using is critical because Xojo is a strongly typed language. This means that every variable has a certain type and that we, as the developers, are expected to treat each variable as its type warrants. So for example, we may perform mathematical operations on numerical data, but not on text. Xojo will offer suggestions and, warnings if you attempt to use, let's say, like a variable that is not supported by its data type. So if you declare this of type integer, it means it's of numeric type. I can involve that in a mathematical, calculation or mathematical operation. However, if this was not a numeric type, and we're going to go over, some of the data types that are most common in Xojo, then you cannot really perform certain operations. So some of the common data types in Xojo. So let's begin by taking a look at integers, which we used in our previous examples. So data types in Xojo. So integers, actually integer, and that is basically used for whole number variables, right? Example, say -3, and that could be positive or negative, by the way. -3, 0, 42, 999, and you name it. It must be a whole number, and it could be negative or positive. The other numeric data type is called double, and that is if you need values, if you need to store values that contain decimal parts, right? So if you need more precision, then you definitely need the double data type, because a double may have a decimal point and may have any number of significant digits beyond the decimal point. So, for example, so we're using this for decimal, and example, let's say 2.5, let's say 6.9, negative 0.589, and so on. So the values here have decimal points, and the precision is quite large. Another data type that is a string, and this is one of the most common data types that you're going to find us using in our future videos and future projects, and that is for any values that is of type text. So for example, let's say ABC, the word hello, anything that is considered of type string must be in quotation marks. As you see here, numeric values are not in quotation marks, but any value that is of type string must be put in quotation marks. Even this value here, let's say 100, If you put it in quotation marks, then it's considered a string value. That means this is not the number 100. This is the string 100. It's the text 100. So it has 3 characters, the character 1, the character 0, the character 0. And it's not the number 1, the digit 1. This is the character. So because this is in quotation marks, this tells Xojo this is a string. It's not numeric. You can't make this be part of a mathematical operation. So I'm going to give you some example. Also, let's say another popular data type, that is the Boolean data type, and that is used for logical types. So this is used to store a truth value. So its value may be true or false, and those are the only options. So it could either be true or false. So let me give you examples. So I've given you an example for the integer. Let me give you an example for double. Again, to declare a variable of type double, you use the var keyword like every other variable. Let's say GPA is a name, and then let's say as double, and let's say, yeah, so that's how we can declare a variable that can contain values of type double. Now, to set a value to, any variable, you could simply use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. So you could simply say var GPA as double equal, let's say like 3.9. So here we did 2 things. We reserved the memory space in our computer's memory. We named it GPA, and we set its data type to be of double. And then we did this, and that is assigning a value to this variable in memory. That means we have already assigned a value to this location in memory. So now if we go inside this computer's memory and take a look at what's stored in this variable in this location, we'll find this value 3.9. So here we're declaring, and this part is assigning a value. An assignment is from right to left. So this value, 3.9, is assigned to this variable, this memory location that's called GPA. To declare variables of type string, you guessed it, so it's var, let's say st name, let's say like for student names, as the type is string. Again, it's not case sensitive, so do not really worry about the fact that some of this stuff is in uppercase and some is lowercase. And if I want to assign a value to it, I can assign a value at the time of declaration, but I can also wait until later on to say, like, I can reserve the space and just simply do this, reserve the memory space, and I say, all right, hey Xojo, reserve a memory space for string value, right? And I could just simply assign the value later. And if I choose to do so, that means I'm going to type another line of code, and I will refer to the name of the variable. So I say st name equals this new value. It is of type string, has to be in quotation marks. So for example, Tom. So these 2 lines of code could be done separately, but this one has to be done first because you first need to reserve the memory space, declare the variable, then you can use it. So once this is executed, then this becomes valid. And like I said earlier, that you can do the 2 steps at the same time, which is assigning and also declaring at the same time. Now keep in mind, it really depends on what logic you have in mind, because let's say that you are creating an application that's going to be used for storing student names. I mean, you know that you'll be storing student names, but you don't know the name yet, because until the application is being used or the name is entered, I will know the name. So therefore, I will reserve the memory space, and then I will wait until I get the value, then I can assign it to that memory location. However, if you know the value from the beginning, from the get-go, you just simply declare the variable and assign it at the time of the declaration. So this will occur like 2 in 1, right? And this is just in 2 separate steps. So it's good to know that we have 2 options. And also Boolean variables. I mean, you could declare a variable, say, variable, let's say var, let's say open, and let's say as the data type is Boolean, and let's say we set it to true, right? So simply like this. And you can also, set the value at the beginning. Like this is like an initial value. So you're initializing a variable to an initial value, but you can modify it later by simply just referring to this name and just simply making or reassigning it to, let's say, false, right? So, and by the way, this applies to all these, data types. It's not like simply just for Boolean. So everything that we mentioned here applies to all these variables. So you can simply initialize it or can leave it without initializing it. But then when you want to reset the value or change the value, then you could do it with this line of code. So this is some of the most common variable data types that we're going to be using. However, the list goes on, so you could check them out. I will put down a much bigger list down in the description so you can check out the other data types. But these are the most common ones that we're going to be using throughout these, video series. I also, I want to conclude this part of variables by creating, a project that puts all this into practice. So we're going to have some hands-on with variables. Okay, so create a new Xojo project, and now you're looking at the workspace. So right now we have one empty window, and this window here has a title that says untitled. So we want to customize that. So let's begin by simply changing this title to a meaningful title. Now to access the properties for this window, you simply go to Inspector. The window itself is a control. So you see here that the library has a list of controls, and the window itself is considered a control. And because it is a control, it has a set of properties that you can customize. You can access that by going to Inspector. So you see it says the name is window1, and also there are some other properties that we can customize. So to change this title from untitled, we go to the title, which is in the frame section. So go to title property and change that to introduce yourself. And now if you click away from that, you'll see that the name or the title for this window is changed to introduce yourself. Okay, very good. Now, the next thing that we want to do is go to the library so we can grab a label and we add it, drag it and drop it onto this window. So now we added a label. We want to also customize this label. So we go to Inspector and make sure that here it says label 1. No, that means we are looking at the properties for this label and not the properties for this window. Okay, so you can easily get confused, and to really make sure that you're looking at the right set of properties is to take a look at the name of the control here to see which one you're actually customizing. So we want to make sure that we're customizing the properties for label 1. So let's go ahead and change the name here. I like to start all my controls with a prefix that tells me what type of control this is. And you'll see how helpful this is when we start typing code. So I'm going to call this LBL as in label, and then first name or last name. So LBL L name, I chose that name for my label. Now, don't confuse the name with the actual text that shows in the label. So to change that text, you need to go to the text property, which can be found in the appearance section. So it's right here. Right now it says untitled, so I'm going to change that to say last name. Okay, so last name colon. Okay, so now my label says last name. And the next thing I want to add is a text field. So I'm going to go back to library because that's where text fields are. And here is the text field. So if you're not sure if this is a text field or not, just click on it and take a look at the description in the bottom. It tells you text field. So if you're like, oh, maybe this is a text field. So you click on that, it says password field, okay? A lot of students actually get confused with, let me see. So there's a text area control as well, or maybe even like the group box here, because it looks like, you know, a text field. So make sure that when you click on it, it tells you text field right here in the bottom. So take that text field and just simply drag and drop, and then just place it right next to the label. Well, let's go ahead and customize this text field. That is by going to Inspector, and we're going to change the name to txt lname. So txt as in text field. So that is just to tell me what type of control this is. So I'm going to say txt last name, so lname. And I will keep everything else as default. Okay, so now we have a label and we have a text field. Okay, so we have a label and a text field. The next thing that we want to do is simply adding another set of labeled text field. So that is going to be for first name. So we could simply, you know, follow the same process that we followed when adding last name and first name. You know, I'm sorry, when adding the label and the text field, or we can just simply be lazy and just copy. So to copy, you just simply drag the mouse over these two. And in Windows, you can hold, let's say, the control button and just drag, or you could simply just Command C, Command V on Macintosh, and Control C, Control V in Windows. So you get another set of label text field that are identical to the previous ones, and we just simply customize them. So I dragged my mouse over these two, and I made sure that they both selected. You see like the handles pop up when they're selected. And then I did Control C, Control V, means copy and paste. So click on the second label here and just go ahead and make sure the name here, we're going to change it to LBL first name, so that is F name. And then we're going to change its text as well to say first name instead of last name. Okay, so really just a shortcut, but you know, if you find that confusing, just simply follow the same process that we followed when adding individual, you know, controls. And then don't forget to change as well the text field. So I'm going to make that txt fname, and also changing, that's it, yes. So now we have a set of controls for last name and a set of controls for our first name. So the next thing is to add another set, and that's just going to be for the birth year. So let's go ahead and simply copy and paste and just, you know, drop them here. So changing the first labels text, by the way, could be accessed through the inspector, but also if you hover over it, you get this pencil, and it gives you this pop-up tooltip that you can customize the text there. Okay, so I'm going to customize the text here just to give you another option of how you can change the text. But this is only changing or affecting the text and not the name of that control. I'm going to make it say birth year and click away. And make sure that you change the name as well here. So I'm going to say LBL B year. Okay. And the text field as well. So go ahead and change its name. So txt_b year. Okay. Now we have the last name text field, the first name text field, and the birth year text field. And lastly, we're going to add simply just one button. So let's go ahead and go to the library and grab a button. So this is an OK button that we're going to grab. So let's take this button right here, just place it here. And we will customize this button. So I'm going to change its text by, simply hovering it and clicking on that little button with a pencil on it, and just change this to introduce. Okay, so the text that's going to pop up is going to say introduce. I can go to inspector and do it through the caption option and change that to introduce. And I can change the name here to say BTN introduce. Now, the reason why I'm renaming, my controls to meaningful names, because, when you start typing code to distinguish between these text fields or these controls, you really need meaningful names, because you can't just simply rely on the generic names like text field 1, text field 2, text field 3. When you type in code, you don't know really if that text field is for year or for the first name or for the last name, because it simply just doesn't give you much of information. And take a look on the left side here is that these are the controls, and these are the ones that we added. So it says BTN introduce, LBL year, LBL first name, LBL L name, TXT birth year, TXT first name, TXT L name. To make sure that you customized all these controls, just refer to this section here, because it tells you what all the controls have in terms of names. Okay, so we're done in terms of customizing our design. Now we're going to take a look at how we can add code to make this button really does execute certain actions. So we're going to add an event handler to this introduce. But before I do that, I want to run it just to give you an idea on how this application looks like so far. So when we run this, we get this executable. So where I can simply type in a first name, a last name, and I can type in a first name and then a birth year, let's say like 2000, and I can click introduce, but nothing happens, right? Because we haven't told, or we haven't programmed this button to do anything. We need to tell this button, what action or what event handler is going to be executed. All right, so exit out of this. And now it's the time to add code. So the first thing that we want to do is simply double click this introduce button. And when you double click it, it says, all right, what event handler you want to add to this BTN introduce? There are a lot of options. So you can basically simply have an event handler like for mouse over, right? So if the mouse, let's say, enters, like hovers over the button, we can have an action that gets to be executed. But we're going to simply keep the default. So by just simply pressing the button, the following code is going to be executed. All right, so notice here, this is my button BTN introduce, and this is the event handler called pressed. So when this button is pressed, this code that we're going to type now is going to execute. So because we are practicing the idea of variables, and because we want to make use of this powerful, tool, let's go ahead and declare the needed variable. So if you take a look here, my application is simply going to collect a last name, a first name, a birth year from the users, and then is going to use them for a certain process that I will let you know later. So if I want to collect this and store it somewhere in memory, and collect this and store it in somewhere in memory, then I definitely need some kind of a mechanism to do so. And we just introduced variables, and we said variables are just a named location in memory. So if I want to take this value that the user will type here and store it in memory, then I definitely need some variables. So in total here, I think I need 3 variables. So let's go ahead and create 3 variables. So, and you can guess it, the types as well. So the first name is going to be of type string because it is text. So let's go ahead and actually last name is going to be first. So I can call my variable last name, and I'm using camel casing. So last name, and it's as string, that's the data type. And then another variable that I need is going to be of type string as well, and that is going to be for first name. So first name as string. Now I could have declared these variables on the same line, by the way. instead of just simply declaring them in two separate lines, I could simply do the following. I could do comma first name. So as you notice here, I mean, this tells Xojo we're declaring two separate variables, but they're both of type string. So this is also like one way to simplify your code. Instead of just having them in two separate lines, which is totally fine, I can simply declare them all at the same time. And then I'm going to declare another variable that's going to be called birth year, right? So birth year. And the proper data type for a birth year will be an integer. Okay. Now that I declared the needed variables, now I want to get the values from the text field. So when the user types any value in these text fields, when that button is pressed, when the user, let's say, types here Smith, and first name is Bob, and the birth year, let's say, is 2000, and they click this introduce button, I want this value to be stored in the variable that I declared, and also this value to be stored in the variable first name that I declared, and 2000 will be stored in the birth year variable that I declared, right? So to do so, I need to write the code that does it. So I'll say, all right, then in last name variable, I want to make it equal. So that means I'm assigning the value that comes from text field. So you see here how powerful it is to use prefixes. So I know that the value that's coming from is coming from a text field. So that means it should start with txt. Now I have three options. Which ones? So there's txt birth year, txt first name, txt L name. By the way, you type txt, press the tab key in your keyboard, tab, and it will give you all the options to start with txt. And I want the last name, so I'll just choose it from there. But what do I want from that control, right? So do I want its name? Do I want its size? Do I want its color? It's a text field, right? And I will get something from it. Do I want its color? Do I want its height? Do I want its width? I actually want the text property of that text field. So simply type in .text. Okay, so this takes the text that's typed in that text field, txtl name, and assigns it to this variable in that location in memory called last name. We're going to do the same thing for the first name. So we're going to say first name. So first name equals, the text field is txt. Again, you simply type txt. If I typed lbl, I would just simply see all the labels, but I wanted the text fields. So first name, and I will get the text out of that. Okay. And also my birth year variable, I'm going to make it equal to txt birth year dot text. Now, there's something here that we are going to see for the first time, which is that anything that is text is simply of type string. And anything that is of type string must be assigned to a variable. If I want to assign it, it has to be assigned to a variable of type string. So our last name and first name are both of type string, so there's no problem there. So any text is, of type string. So therefore, there's no compatibility issues here when assigning. However, here in this line, I'm taking a text from the txt birth year, and that is of type string. And I'm trying to assign it to a variable called birth year, which is of type integer. So definitely that is an error. So means that we want to turn this into the proper data type. There are two ways that I usually use. The first way is to simply convert this by adding dot integer, right? So simply this is going to turn this code, this value, which is of type string, into an integer. And there is another way, which is a much simpler way, using a function called val. So if you do val and then put all this in parentheses, it's simply going to convert the string value into a numeric value. In this case, if it is an integer, it will be converted into an integer. If it is a double, it will be converted into a double, and so on. So I recommend using val, really. It's much better than, I mean, both ways will work, but I prefer using val. It comes down to your preference. But this is mandatory. It is mandatory in order for you to make this work. So this is of type string. You want to convert it to numeric, just simply use the function val. Put this value in the parentheses for the val function. So pass it to val, and val will convert it for you and make it of type integer so that when we assign it to birth year, it will make sense. Okay. Now that we passed the values from the text fields, I actually want to create some type of a message that is going to be displayed in a message box. So I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call this, let's say, message. And it's going to be of type string. And then I'm going to say, all right, my message is going to be equal to the combination of the following, which is last name. So I'm actually going to say, hey, which is of type string. So I'm going to say, hey, space. And then I'm going to combine that with a plus sign. So with a plus sign, you can combine multiple pieces of data. So you're going to say, hey, last name. So if they typed Smith, so hey, Smith. And then plus, let's say a space. And then I say plus first name. Okay. And then plus, so I'm going to say, hey, let's say Bob Smith, Bob space Smith, plus you are, let's say you are, okay, let's put a space here. So you are, and then plus, let's say birth year, you are born in, let's say, birth year. Okay, so yeah, it's too simple, but really just simply to put all this into perspective. So I'm generating a message. So I'm using this variable here. So I'm saying, hey, this message variable is going to be composed of the combination of all of these. So let me decrease the font size here. By the way, to customize your window and to show, let's say, your text in a different size. So you could go to edit and then go to options, and then you go to coding, and then you see here the size says 36. I'm going to change it to 18, and this is like a display. All right, so now that our code is in one window, so it says, hey, last name. So last name is coming from the variable last name, and then the space combined with the value that's coming from the first name variable plus this static text, you are born in, plus the value that's coming from the variable birth year. Now that I composed my message, I'm going to display that message in a message box. Okay, so how do we do that? So simply do message box. So if you type message and you get all these options, so we're actually going to use a message dialog, and then we're going to use show. What message are we showing is really just simply the value of the variable message. So we came up with this message, which is the combination of all these values that are coming from some variables and plus some static text that's in quotation marks, combined using this plus operator. So the plus operator just combines these values together, concatenates all these values, and creates just one message. That one message we will display it in this message dialog box. All right, so let's just go ahead and run this and see what we get. Okay, so we have an error here. So this is an opportunity for us to debug our code. And I know what the error is, and it's meant to be there, just so to introduce how to debug your code. So whenever you have an error in your code, a message will pop up at the bottom here, and it actually will highlight for you where the error is. So it says, all right, the problem is here, where that red X is. Technically here, the error is based on compatibility. So you see, like, all the stuff here is basically of type string, because first name and last name are two variables of type string. And everything that's in quotation marks is of type string. However, birth year is of type integer. And because we're having access to a variable of type integer, but we're turning all of this stuff into simply a value that's going to be assigned to this variable message, which is of type string. That means we expect that everything that is part of this value is going to be turned into a string. But the only part that is not of type string here is birth year, which is of type integer. So that means we want to convert this into string. So to do so, earlier, to convert from string to numeric, we used val. There must be another function that we can use to convert from integers to string. That function is called str. So to convert this into a string, just simply use str. So str birth year means convert birth year into a string. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run our code and see if the error is gone. Okay, so the error is gone and our application is running. So it's prompting me for a last name. I'm going to say James. And let's say it's prompting me for the first name. I'm going to say LeBron. Right? And then the birth year, I'm not sure when. I think it's 1985, I would say, maybe. I click introduce, and we get this message box that says, hey, James LeBron, you are born in 1985. So that is really the gist of it. So this is just one introduction to variables, and this is just a hands-on on variables using a Xojo project. The idea, definitely, you're being introduced to it for the first time, but it will sink in with more projects. More practice is really the key. Okay, so this is the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one with another topic using Xojo. Peace.